I've played a lot of Super Nintendo games, and throughout time I've spent a lot of time on longer games, but what games are the shortest? That's what we're here to discuss today. Now, I do read comments and I do incorporate feedback where I feel it's appropriate. I'm not one of those YouTubers that ignores the concerns of the community that built me, so for this episode, I'm not going to include arcade games that loop. Instead, I'm going to solely talk about games with a clear-cut objective, right? Let's begin. I love jigsaw puzzles. It's something that I find to be incredibly therapeutic, right? And to my knowledge, outside of PC software, I had never seen a home console jigsaw game, so when this popped up, I was kind of dumbfounded. This is so stupid cool. A jigsaw puzzle game on the Super Nintendo, and it doesn't look bad at all. Now, the thing that sucks about this game is that it was designed by Prism Kikaku, and Pieces was their only game released in America for a very significant amount of time, at least if we consider the magnitude of games that they released in Japan. Pieces was released in 1994. Their next game to come out in America was in 2000, Rhapsody: A Musical Adventure, which I do know of because Atlas published it, but I never really looked into the company. If you want a nifty, short little fun jigsaw puzzle arcade game you can beat in like 30 minutes, look no further than Pieces. I might actually buy this one. I talk often about how shoot-'em-ups had a wild frontier of development in their early years, and how people were trying to break free of the Space Invaders inspiration by mixing it up just a tad bit. In some ways, we can apply that to the fighting genre as well, or really any genre. Before Street Fighter II set the standard for tournament fighters that we know and love today, there were some wacky games. Atari's Pit Fighter is one of those. We could choose from one of 3 different fighters, each with their own specialty: Buzz, the wrestler; Tai, the kickboxer; or Kato, the black belt. We walk around a hilariously open fighting pit surrounded by folks who are all sepia-toned. And if we beat the shit out of our opponent, we knock the color right out of them, straight into the black and white world for you. I can only logically assume this means that the entire crowd is slowly dying. Tragedy. Pit Fighter is a short game, but you can beat it. No, it's not going to be a fun time. In fact, it's going to be quite a bad time. I would rather shove a hand grenade up my ass and become a human claymore than play this game. It's just Atari Jank 101 for all 30 minutes of it. Oh, Barbie, a child's doll created in 1959 that eventually became a huge industry. Thanks, Ruth Handler. If you know anything about Barbie, you'll know for the longest time they existed for the sole purpose of fashion for 65 years now. My sister had one, your sister had one, your mom probably had one. I had an ostensibly gay cousin that had one. I had a kin, so I could play with my sister, and why stop there? They would make movies, books, TV shows, Netflix specials, and more importantly, video games. Now, the only Barbie video game I've actually sat down and played is Barbie's Horse Adventures on the PS2, and guess what? It's not bad. It's not good, but it's not bad. It took a long time for Barbie to get to the 3D world, and Supermodel is a great example of that. Most of the game is just a small vignette of arcade sequences, but if you make it through it all, you get a credit sequence after the fashion show. It's a 28-minute game at best. I've yet to play a pool game that I've enjoyed. I've tried Championship Pool, Konami Pool, or Exciting Billiards, and I've played Side Pocket, which is Data East's take on the game. And honestly, if I had to choose any pool game out of the ones that I just mentioned, it would be Side Pocket on the Super Nintendo. To me, it's not fair, but the physics aren't as gnarly or mean as Konami Billiards or Championship Pool. To beat this, you'll need to be really good at pool, or at least Super Nintendo Pool. And you'll need to beat every match across the country before getting the championship trophy and receiving credits, assuming you win every match without any issues. Little trivia fact for you: if you want some boobies with your pool, try Pocket Gal, same company, and for some weird reason, if you beat the game, they become so enthralled by your stick and ball capabilities on the pool table, they show you a little side boob. Let's stay on the topic of Data East with Fighter's history. Now, being a fighting game, this game is incredibly short, but that's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about precedent. Copyright infringement in video games. Historically, our first major lawsuit was Magnavox versus the world when Pong became a media craze. And Magnavox, they won that lawsuit. It destroyed Atari into multiple pieces, some of which are still alive to this day. But in 1993, Capcom sued Data East because they believed that Fighter's history was too close in proximity to the nature of Street Fighter II. And guess what? In some ways, it was. Certain elements and characters seemed to be copy and pasted with Data East's magic, but in the end, Capcom lost. You know, I've toyed with the idea of making a 10 video about 10 high visibility lawsuits in the video gaming industry, but I considered it so niche that I didn't really make it. I don't know, it's hard to explain, but if you want to see it, let me know down in the comments. I'll gladly make it. Consider it a gift for helping me reach 5,000 amazing subscribers on YouTube. Back to the game though, it's just a fighting game with a unique system known as the weak point system, where if you keep kicking someone in their weak spot, you can stun them. For some characters it might be a mask, others it could be a glove, it really depends on the characters. It's a short game though, 25-minute tops. TV show video games were always a part of my childhood. Growing up, I loved watching the Game Show Network with my grandparents. We would watch The Price is Right, Press Your Luck, and when I was a teen, I was watching tons of game shows on Nickelodeon. Remember Guts? Legends of the Hidden Temple? Get the picture? That was a time to be alive. But this is Family Feud. Basically, the way it works, at least the TV show, people would call folks and ask them to answer a survey, and if they did, their goofy off-the-wall answers would be added to the collective and likely used for the show. Once the show aired, we'd see contestants getting asked to name something you would likely find in the bedroom, and then some middle-aged goon-ass hits the buzzer and shouts, "Alfredo sauce!" And the host would look at the camera and make a quirky remark. Or in the case of Richard Dawson, he would probably kiss your daughter on the forehead with his tongue out. It's a very interesting show. That being said, it is a product of the 90s, so some of the questions that are asked are from the perspective of culture at the time, so it can be challenging. But a single game, it won't take long. While on the topic of TV show Super Nintendo games, Wheel of Fortune is another one that historically has always had off-the-wall clues, or well, the clues are literally on the wall. Vanna White has to seductively tap them for them to show up. Or for some of my older audience, she would have to rotate the block. Remember that? Prior to 1997, you remember when gas was 83 cents? I like Wheel of Fortune. You can kind of decide if you want to risk it for the money or solve the puzzle, and many of them aren't too far outdated like you would see with, say, Jeopardy or Family Feud. This is an interesting one. If you've watched the channel for a while, I've covered a lot of track and field related games because I covered Konami fairly extensively on my Twitch channel, but this isn't Konami, this is Tiertex, a company that did a lot of busy work for a lot of different companies, be it THQ, Atari, Disney. They were the kind of people you went to when you didn't expect much for your money, but wanted to push software out that was actually playable, albeit on a more obsolete medium, right? This particular game occurs during the time of the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta, and we go through 10 different events, and honestly, it doesn't look bad. Now, there was a better version of it. It was released on the PS1, and with the PS1, it kind of looks like dog shit. Great job, Silicon Dreams. Great job. You remember Operation Wolf and how batshit insane it was in the arcades? Well, this is the sequel, Operation Thunderbolt. Aesthetically, it's very similar to the original game, it just feels significantly more fair. The one issue I had with Operation Wolf is that the enemies were far too small. Operation Thunderbolt feels more like a real light gun game, and because Taito made it, it was ported, in this case to every single home computer and to the Super Nintendo. And because it was on the Super Nintendo, we had the luxury of using the Super Scope. The Super Scope was the Super Nintendo's licensed light gun, and the only other competitor was the Justifier if we don't count the weird US Army light gun. Honestly, to me, the home port is very faithful to the original arcade game, which isn't that long, roughly 8 levels. One of the cooler things about the arcade version though is that it has mounted guns, whereas Operation Wolf had this little Uzi. Now, for many people, the franchise stops there, but there are 3 more games, Operation Wolf 3, and then 2 Operation Tiger games. Those games played a lot more like Time Crisis, and no, they aren't good. I don't like Acclaim, and because I don't like Acclaim, I don't like Acclaim Studios Salt Lake City. And because I don't like Acclaim Studios Salt Lake City, I don't like the company that it was prior to being acquired, Sculptured Software. Historically, every single game I've played by Sculptured Software has been microwaved fart bombs, like Mortal Kombat 2 on the Super Nintendo, or Doom on the Super Nintendo, or Super Star Wars, which is one of the most frustrating games I've ever had on the Super Nintendo as a whole. But I will say, this one, for what it is okay. It's just basketball with Looney Tunes characters that look like they were drawn by an amateur in Microsoft Paint. Honestly, if you told me this was a CDI game, I would believe you. But the fact remains that you're playing a somewhat decent basketball game. It's not long at all. We choose our 2 players like an NBA Jam, and we go up against a few other 2-player sets, and that's it, no more nor less. It's a 15-minute game, tops. In the shortest NES episode, I added Chessmaster to the list, but this time I'm only giving it an honorable mention, because technically, while you only need to beat the Chessmaster in any difficulty of your choice, it's a subjective win condition at best. That being said, Chessmaster is and will always be one of the premier ways to enjoy chess on your home video game console or computer. It's a tried and true program that's kicked ass all the way since 1986 with the Chessmaster 2000. If you ask me, a series with 19 distinct versions is a great lineage. Now we just have to rely on Ubisoft to care enough to continue it. I don't think they will. Well, it's one of the shortest games on the NES, and here it is again as the shortest I could think of on the Super Nintendo. Let's do a little bit of catch-up. Where's Waldo started as Where's Wally in the United Kingdom. It was renamed to Waldo when it came to America, and it was made by Martin Hanford and took the world by storm, at least in the pop culture world. It was one of those badass find the item gimmicks, much like I Spy, which was more of my style growing up, but Where's Waldo was something that I remember very dearly. Now, the game is based on the third book, The Great Waldo Search, and while it maintains the same aesthetic as the NES entry, it's the 16-bit update. So to me, it's a much more fun experience. The music is better, the animation actually looks great, it's just a better game. The most recent game was actually a remake of this, named The Fantastic Journey, and it doesn't look half bad. And that's it for today. What did you think of this list? Are there any games that you feel are even shorter than this? I would love to hear them down below, and I know that the community would as well. There are tons of great games for the system, and many of them, they are quite long, so finding the shorter ones can be tough, so maybe you'll expose someone to something cool. If you made it to the end of this video, you're already home with our community. We're a group of individuals who love remembering a time when life was a little bit easier to live. Finally, the single most important thing you can do for me is to hit that thumbs up button, as it directly impacts the visibility of the projects and videos that I work on every single day. As always, from my family to your family, good energy, good vibes, Fortefyre out.